it's one of those stories that has kind of gotten lost to history. And in replacement, we get this sort of like, oh, well, women just weren't athletic at that time. Women just weren't,
Right.
we didn't know what they could do. Well, really, we did. Lots of women did do athletic things, or physical labor jobs or things like that, and we never questioned it. But we have these stories that we tell to kind of cover these things up and tell ourselves, well, we're just getting started really as athletes.
You're listening to the Active Mom Podcast with host Dr. Carrie Pagliano. I'm a mom, physical therapist, and your go-to guide for staying active with pelvic health issues in pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, and beyond. Whether you're a fellow mom, physical therapist, or women's health professional, join me where I'll share expert insights, real-life stories, and the latest research to help you approach running, CrossFit, yoga, Pilates, HIIT, or whatever activity you love with confidence and evidence-informed guidance. Let's start the show. All right, welcome back to the Active Mom Podcast. Our next guest, Maggie Mertens, is an author of Better, Faster, Farther, How Running Changed Everything We Know About Women. And I was really lucky enough to hear her speak at the Female Athlete Conference this last year in Boston. And I just told her before we hopped on the air, it took me longer than I had hoped to finish the book because there were so many times that I just was angry. And we'll talk about why I was angry in just a second. But Maggie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Carrie.
Tell us a little bit about who you are, how you became a writer to talk about women runners, quite honestly.
Yeah. So, I am a freelance journalist. I've been doing that for almost a decade. And yeah, about 10 years ago, I started writing a lot about women athletes. And this was sort of in the years before, the soccer pay equality fight, all of that. And I had kind of come from like a women's magazine background and did a lot of work in those years on the pay gap and making sure that women were in all of the CEO jobs and things like that, and we covered a lot of that kind of thing. And when I would bring up stories about women athletes, it was kind of like a little bit of a dead zone. And so once I went freelance, I started to sort of look at it from that perspective of like, why do we have this gigantic chasm right between how we look at, treat, and pay women athletes versus men, and I'm a millennial. I grew up kind of in the era of like girl power and every girl plays sports and all of that stuff. And yet at the same time in a very gender toxic environment, I think. And so, I saw a lot of this just firsthand. And writing about running really came because I wanted to write about this idea from a larger perspective from what is it about women athletes, about women's bodies that like we cannot accept as strong, as, fast, as capable. And how has this impacted all of these different, parts of our lives, society, and, sports tells a wonderful story about that, right? Because running in particular, right, women were told 100 years ago, you can't run at all, or like, you can only
Right.
run this far, you can only run that far. Of course, we can't have a marathon in the Olympics. I mean, that's only been around for 40 years. So I think some of that is, seeing that it's very recent history when we kind of often, I think when we take a step forward, especially in terms of equality, we sort of forget where we came from, right?
Yes.
And how much had to be done. And so I really wanted to go through and sort of outline exactly how we got to this place where we have these incredible women professional athletes who are doing things that not only were previously thought of as impossible, but were previously thought of as things men could only do,
Right.
and really breaking molds in all kinds of ways. And so that's kind of, it took me several years of research and all of that to get to the point of, okay, I want to write about from the perspective of runners and tell this kind of bigger story about gender equality and physical capability.
Yeah, no, I love that. Some of my favorite guests that we've had on the podcast, Christine Yu has been on, Daniel Friedman. I find myself feeling very strongly about making sure people understand the history of how we got here. Because, like you said, you came up in the generation where, okay, you're supposed to be doing this. If I mean, I'm about to turn 50, like a lot of these things weren't going on even when I was on this
Yes.
earth. And so much of kind of my field in kind of understanding pelvic health, navigating pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, menopause was a reflection of society and what was going on at the time, what society would accept as acceptable activity for women. We couldn't study something that you couldn't do or you weren't allowed to do.
Right.
So when you're trying to figure out where to start this project, I would think the first question would be how far back can we go? Um, how hard was that to figure out where to start that conversation and where to begin?
Yeah, I mean, it was, like I said, it took about 6 years total. So there were about 4 years where I was literally just researching. And some of that, a lot of that wasn't running specific. It was kind of sports specific
Hmm.
and, strength. I was really interested in the idea of strength and when women were kind of like told they were just not strong, right? Like we were just the weaker sex, and I kind of wanted to know where that all came from. And as I kind of, honed in on running, but also on some of these specific events that really, drove those points home, it became pretty obvious that I wanted to start with just this idea of competitive running because there was
Yeah.
such an easy timeline, right? Like we could see not only that, okay, there were 30 years of Olympics before or 20 years
Right.
before women were even allowed in, right? And so to talk about what that era must have been like and what those ideas must have been like. And then, to have this 1928 Olympics, which is an extremely important moment in terms of women's sports history, because these women runners who ran the 800 were told, okay, run the 800, and yet then we're told that none of them actually ran it well enough, or that they all supposedly didn't make it. And in the next Olympics, they were only allowed to run 100 meters, and so
I I love that you start the book telling that story because as someone who like in high school I did the 800 and I was usually doing 1500 or 3000. That's when everybody goes to the bathroom. 800 was a
yeah.
sprint for me. 400 was worse,
Yes.
but 800 was like that's not that far. And then
No.
to talk about the reporting, that's what I was just
Mhm.
the report, and that was probably my first moment of anger. So to be full disclosure here, when Maggie knocks, why don't you explain what you do? Like you tell the story, but then you tell about what people tell about the story, right?
Yes, yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, my editor at one point had to be like, Maggie, this is not a media criticism book. Like dial it back.
Or is
But
it?
yeah, yeah, I think part of it is about, right? It's about how these myths and stories were kept
Yes.
alive for so long. And some of that is about how the media covered women athletes incorrectly, often for a very long time, or, very stereotypically and things like that. So, yeah, in that one in particular, it was really about getting to the bottom of what really happened. I mean, I knew just from reading the media reports that were all, I mean, A, different, and B, like very sensational. um,
Like the women were like
that
they were all over the ground, right? We were writhing and like
writhing on the ground, they needed to be carried off on stretchers in some reports. Some of them fainted in the locker room afterwards. They needed like medical attention on the field after. And this was, I knew that this couldn't be true. It couldn't all be true. And
right,
then of course, people say, oh well, people fall like lay down on the ground all the time after running an 800 or whatever they're running, right? Especially if you're that high level of
right.
athlete. And so, yeah, it is about, yes, this is what happened. These are the women that did the things that they were told were not possible. But these were the stories that were then told about them and how these myths kind of kept going, even when women did prove it wrong.
Yeah. No, that was one thing that definitely struck me as, reality and people getting to do things, but then how people shared that story and what history carried forward. I think the other poignant thing that I kept seeing a pattern of was women who would push things forward, and then ultimately some other bigger association, society, things like that, would basically be like, oh no, we want the women now. And then they would basically shut everything down. Can you give
Yeah.
us some examples of some of those characters that honestly have been lost to some degree to history? Like a lot of these women I had never heard of before.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so there's a wonderful woman, Elise Milliat. She was French, and she actually is the person who started the Women's Olympic Games. And so when the Olympics were first started by Pierre de Coubertin, they were for men only. And Elise had kind of she had sort of a sporty background. This was, um, when a time when sports were sort of just getting off the ground, especially for a kind of a higher class individual, lots of, little rowing clubs and football clubs, even, and things like that. And, she thought, well, this is silly. Of course, women should be able to compete too, and started her own Women's Olympic Games. And what happened was they were very popular, and there were lots of women athletes from around the world who showed up and competed, and people who came and watched, spectators. It was all a strong event. But what happened was the men running the Olympics um, kind of shut her down. And they basically, kept sort of saying, well, you can't use the Olympics name because that's ours. And so she changed it to the Women's World Games. And then they said, well, you can't have it here because we're going to do this here, And so it just became this whole thing where she was trying to prove to them, well, if you don't want me to do this, then just let women into the Olympics
Right.
and, you know, we can do all of these things. So why are we not a part of this huge international organization? And again, it's one of those stories that has kind of gotten lost to history, and in replacement, we get this sort of like, oh well, women just weren't athletic at that time. Women just weren't.
Right.
We didn't know what they could do. Well, really, we did. Lots of women did do athletic things, or physical labor jobs or things like that, and we never questioned it. But we have these stories that we tell to kind of cover these things up and tell ourselves, well, we're just getting started really as athletes, right? We're just like,
Right.
this is still all new. And yeah, so that was really fun for me, was actually finding those women, and
Yeah.
and being able to tell those stories of like, actually, there were women doing all this. Even when we were told you can't run a mile, there were women running miles, or
Right.
marathons.
Yeah. No, and in some cases, you were able to talk to relatives of those individuals that it took them even a while to figure out who these people were because, they very humble. They're not going to be like, hey, I tried
Yes.
to do all this. Like, tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, yes, and that is definitely a pattern that kept happening. So I wrote about one American woman, Florence McDonald, who was in that 1928 Amsterdam Olympics. She made the final in the 800 meters, and she was an 18-year-old from Boston at the time. Like, she was just a schoolgirl. She really, stumbled into running, and just happened to be really good at it. And she, competed at these. They had a lot of kind of local community running clubs and swimming clubs and things at that time, especially for more like working class women in the US. And they were often associated with like immigrant groups and things like that.
Mhm.
So she actually found her way in. She was a Scottish, her family was Scottish immigrants. And so, she like actually learned how to run, or she did her first race at a Highland Games outside of Boston. So you had these like, wonderful women who I could find in newspapers and see their races. And then I ended up getting in touch with her son, who is, I think, in his 80s now. And he told me, like, I never knew her as a runner. Like, she
Wow.
once, and this was a pattern, was once these women would, inevitably get married and have children, they were told, like, okay, like, there's no, we're done with that. Like,
Right.
that is a young woman's game. And of course, like, once you become a mother, like, that is your sole responsibility.
Hmm.
Um, And so often, this happened also with Deanne Leather, who was the first woman to run a sub 5 minute mile in the UK. And her daughter told me I didn't know she was a runner until I found her scrapbooks like when I was
Wow.
10 or 12 and they were on the shelf, right? And here she was, an Olympian, a world record holder. Like, it's just very wild. And, I mean, it gives me a lot of hope for the fact that, oh my goodness, how far we've come. And these like women Olympians and professional athletes today who
Yeah.
are having children and continuing their careers, but also like
Yeah.
whose children see them as these like huge
Right.
superstars and badasses, and that doesn't have to be something that's kind of hidden away.
Right.
So yeah, that was a really interesting part for me because I was thinking, oh,
They
these
must
like
know.
Olympians, of course
Yeah.
their families will be able to tell me stories, and it
Well,
really wasn't that way.
I think it also speaks to, you know, people who are groundbreakers don't always see themselves as that. They're just doing what they do. And
Mm-hmm.
so, okay, well, that part's done. We're going to move on. And if people weren't kind of elevating and keeping the spotlight on them, they're able to kind of do that. There was this one. It was like a partial quote. Literally had to stop and in the middle of a run, and I'm like, we're typing this one. Women again. I got angry, Maggie. I'm telling you. I was like swearing. People must have think I had like Tourette's or something. My dog must have thought I was crazy when I was walking her. Women pay a very heavy price for a temporary period of athleticism, selfishly trading motherhood for athletic glory. Oh,
Yeah.
ah,
Yeah, yeah. And so this is part of that myth making too, right? That even came from the scientific and medical community that
we
there
weren't
was
helping.
this whole idea, right? That, well, of course, women aren't athletes because they're not naturally strong and big like men are. So if they're doing it, they must be, like, not parts of real society. They're, they're outside of the norm, so it must be causing some kind of harm or pain or whatever.
Right.
And so this was, a very easy way for many of the men in that community to kind of keep sports masculine, was to say, oh, well, of course, this will impact women's reproduction. And, you will not be able to be a mother. And, if you're running, you're probably not going to, be able to bear children. And so this was, obviously just made up. And so I think that that's part of, also the importance of looking back on the history of all of this is, we can't always take, this kind of, okay, like this is what we believed at one point, so it must have been true. We have to look at like, okay, how did they get to that? Oh, well, no one was actually doing any medical research on women at the time,
Right.
right?
Yeah. No, that was the one that, and you point that out, and I'm like, yeah, duh. Like but nobody questioned it. Like, of course, women wouldn't do this. So where's the
Mhm.
data? Oh, wait, you haven't done any.
Yes, right. And we see very similar, parallels with race and things like that, right?
Yes.
Where, okay, we just had these assumptions that, oh, black people are stronger and more brute, and so like they won't feel as much pain and all of that. Okay, were we doing those like actual research? No, we weren't. And if we were
Right.
doing it with, severe stereotype lenses on. And so you do see that, this, of course, science is ever evolving, right?
Yeah.
And does need to be questioned at all times, maybe not in the way certain people do it, but that this we do things evolve as we go on and as we learn more. And we do
Yeah.
need to be, more open-minded about it all.
Yeah. Well, that was an interesting thing too. So as you kind of go through the book, you kind of address like a couple things. Like, yes, you can run, but only 100 meters, or only, this, or only that, or only if you're white. And
Yeah.
several stories of um, Black female athletes who were great, but when it came down to being selected for a position on a relay or something like that, they were nowhere to be found. So you have this like, double situation where, yes, we're recognizing you're a good athlete, but no, we're not going to use you because of racism. Tell us
Mhm.
a little bit of the stories that you found researching that.
Yeah, so that was a really interesting one, especially because, I think our generation, we look at, the Olympic track and field team and we see so many, extremely wonderful, strong Black athletes.
Yep.
And I think to the point that we've actually gotten almost to a different extreme is, we assume that Black people are just naturally better at sprinting. And, then you look at the distance runners, oh, they're all white women, right? For the most part. And that's starting to change a little bit. But it's been a long time that way. And so one of the things that I was curious about was, there were actually these historically Black colleges, especially Tuskegee was one of the big ones that actually did encourage their students to participate in sports, men and women. And it was for them, it was a way to, okay, we see that like some of these Black men who have broken through towards mainstream society and like been accepted have done so through sport, right? Through being, extremely good athletes. And we have, something that we can kind of gain societally that way. And so for them, encouraging women to do the same was like another opportunity, right? To kind of like enter mainstream American society. If you were successful, and they had actually an extremely successful track team, and lots of wonderful runners that came through there. um, and what happened was that, in those 1928 Olympics, of course, we had all women, all white women runners. In the 1932 Olympics, we had all white women runners except for two, who, as you mentioned, were were selected for the relay pool, but then at the last minute were not actually put on the relay team. And then in 1936, we had a similar experience where um, they there were the same two Black women made the team again, and one actually made it in several events. And very, very tragically, she actually got injured on her hurdle in the Olympics, so she wasn't able to go ahead and medal or anything that time. And then, so kind of again, we had this like experience where, okay, well, we'll give these two like token Black women like their shot,
Right.
but we're not actually going to really like let this happen. Well, then we had World War, canceled two Olympics. By
Hmm.
the time the Olympics came back, actually the majority of the women's track team was Black. And so we
Hmm.
had this kind of swap happen because
Mm.
in that time, right, these Black women were told, okay, this is appropriate for you because it's kind of going to help us as a race, like raise our profile. And white women at the time were really, really held back from sports
Right.
because it was, not ladylike, and especially not like for white ladies. So it became kind of a um, something that was popular or accepted only in kind of immigrant communities, working class communities, and, communities of color. And so we did have this big shift in, what these teams ended up looking like and who was encouraged to
Hmm.
run. And I think what's interesting about that is, we know then that like what society tells us about what we're capable of or what is appropriate for us is
Right.
what's going to bear out down the line of like who's doing this and who's seen as talented, right?
Right.
So it doesn't it's not always just about like, oh, this is the best person, especially
Right.
when you have all of these different societal messages about like what you're good at and what you're capable of.
Yeah, no, speaking of white women being delicate, there was something that you mentioned about the stairs at Smith College and how they're
Yes.
so small because we're delicate and need small stairs to walk
Yes.
up. Walk
Yes.
us through that observation.
Yeah, so I went to Smith College, a historically women's college. And the main like academic hall, we always joked that like the stairs are really shallow and long, so you kind of have to like take them two at a time, but then it's awkward. Like there's just no good way to go up and down them. And at one point, I had this friend who was like, oh, well, you know why they're like this, like so that our uteruses won't fall out. And I was like, oh, ha ha ha. jokes. And then somebody else mentioned, oh yeah, we talk about that like on the tour guide. Like this is like a fact that we
Mm-hmm.
give was, because when the school was built, there were all these questions about what women, could do, and we don't want to disrupt them too much physically. And I was like, this can't be real. But I ended up
Yeah.
talking to several people who, said maybe like they probably were shallow because it was a women's college. No one could like fully confirm that it was about the uterus thing, but there's a ton of information from that time that, women were encouraged to, not go to college with men because they couldn't, physically do the same amount of studying or walking across campus. Because it would disrupt their reproductive systems. And
Right.
so there was just this like very intense, and these are medical doctors who were writing these things, right? Um, Ideology that, menstruation and reproduction and puberty, all of these things were just zapped our physical energy because that is all like the female body could do,
Right.
right? And we need all of our energy to go to that. And even walking upstairs or studying too many hours a day, and certainly running or being athletic would take away from all of that, and you would end up either unable to have children or misshapen in some way and all of that. So very
Yeah.
interesting
And enter
times.
another anger moment. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yes.
so as a pelvic floor physical therapist, like here's your concern about my uterus falling out, yet you did not provide me medical support and care to actually address said issue if that were a concern until, oh, I don't know,
Right.
relatively
And meanwhile,
recently.
what
Like,
are they being like encouraged to wear? All of their like, corset petticoats, like all of that stuff was not helping the pelvic floor situation.
no, no. And again, I'm thinking of like, little girls would run. I mean, I'm fortunate enough. My I had some time with my great grandmother who passed away in her
Oh,
mid 90s, and so she was born I think in 1898,
wow.
and she grew up in kind of rural Western New York near the Pennsylvania border. She and her sister were born blind, so they were put on a train as like basically elementary school kids and sent to a blind school in Philadelphia. And she did that multiple times. Very active in her life,
Wow.
farm life, that sort of thing. And so I know what she was capable of, and that kids would run around, and you're like, you have a certain sect of society that how capable women are, because if they aren't, then the farm's going down. But yet when we go
Yes.
into competitive sport, all of a sudden we're delicate. It almost seems like a class thing too.
Yes.
um I mean, at what point in all of this, because clearly we've got some patterns that are going on here.
Yes.
At one point, are you just like, you have to stop and just swear several times and be like, what? Like,
Yes,
I would think it would
actually.
be very hard to do this.
So that's my secret tactic actually, is
Okay.
that when
Anger.
I'm taking notes on, something like the Sex and Education book that was detailing all of these, restrictions on what women were and were not capable of in terms of schooling. I read them through, I put my sticky notes in, and then I go through them again and I take notes in a document. And as I'm like taking notes on the document, I put brackets in, and then I write in capital letters to the person, like what the actual F is wrong with this. Like, this makes no effing sense.
I want your
you
annotated
know?
version of your book now.
Yes. Yes, right. So like, sure, we can, I remember being like really weirded out by this whole, there was part about, oh, we know that education, stymies the reproductive capabilities because we measured the breast size of women who went to school and women who didn't. And I was just like, yeah, of
if you're
course you
if
did.
you're if you're just listening to this and not watching the YouTube, both of us have like these obscene looks on our face, and yeah, you're missing that
Yeah,
part.
yeah,
No, I think there was something along that lines, not with education, but talking about physicians, um, almost like putting women in a victim mindset where they shouldn't do
Mhm.
this, they shouldn't do that. And I have a history of working a lot with women with chronic pain. So I'm very sensitive to that. Like people
Yeah.
that are putting that burden on others that come from a place of authority. Like, tell me a little bit about that. Cause again, like all these societal reasons, like there's so many different things that are just kind of keep trying to push women down that have no base in reality whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah. So there was a lot of that during kind of like turn of the century, early 1900s. That was, women were often given something called the rest cure. And if they were too, essentially like too uppity, right? Too much organizing for suffrage, too much, wanting to work and not be a mother. They were kind of told that, oh, this means that like your nervous system is messed up. You need to rest. You need to like get more fat on your body because that's what's going to help you be a good mother. And we're literally kind of like put to bed and told like, oh, it's just you're just trying to do too much, right? Like this depression or anxiety is not because women have no rights. It's because you're doing the wrong thing, right?
Right.
And so yeah, that part it's extremely frustrating. And what was interesting to me too was, that wasn't just something in the 18 and early
I
1900s, right? We see
know.
it come back,
I
right?
know.
Into even, Bobby Gibb, the first woman who ran the Boston Marathon, who snuck in. She was sent to a psychologist by her parents because she ran. Like, why are you
Right.
always running? She liked running. She's very good at it. She's still very good at it. She still just likes to run. And, that as we know, that's like a personality, right? Like that's something people are just naturally gifted at or naturally, drawn towards. And yet at that time, it was seen as so strange that she would never get a husband, that she would never have children. And that made her, an outcast. And she needed psychotherapy to fix her.
And put that, juxtapose that with all the new data that we literally have coming out on the daily, thank you, Canadian guidelines of Margie Davenport and team about how helpful exercise is for mental health and sleep in pregnancy, postpartum, all of these. And I'm sure we're eventually going to get the perimenopause, menopause version of that. Like
Yeah.
everything that we know now is the exact opposite of that is no, activity is good for you, for the fetus, for your general overall
Yes.
health. Like it's just, and that's where I think the intensity of my anger comes because we finally have this data and oh my god, people knew it at the time and just work so hard against it.
Yes, yes. No, I think that's like it's so valid and it's so true when you think back too on this idea that women were framed for so long as, yeah, like crazy if they did
Right.
anything out of the ordinary or like, weak and, breakable and all of this stuff. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, well, maybe if we'd all just been told to actually exercise and do the
Right.
things that made us feel good, we wouldn't have been so depressed. Maybe
Right.
there wouldn't have been so many mothers dying in childbirth. Maybe there wouldn't have been so many
Right.
stillborn babies. All of these things that, yeah, we've been kind of kept not only from something that brings people a lot of joy and something that's a huge part of society, but that
Yeah.
does, it keeps us all healthier, right? And that
Yeah.
is really frustrating.
Yeah, no, that I think is and again, reading these two things at the same time as all these studies are coming out and reading your book, I'm like, ah! there was rage running, I'm gonna tell you. All
Yes, yes.
right, let's chat about the mile. And I think you spoke to Leather's exhaustion versus Rochester Bannister's exhaustion
Yes.
and how he handled it so much better.
Yes, yes. So it's interesting because, Roger Bannister is this world famous name, right? If you know anything about running or if you were alive in the 60s, like you probably know Roger Bannister because he was this just incredibly huge celebrity for being the first man to break the 4 minute mile. And what's interesting is, it was only a few weeks later in the same country that Deanne Leather was the first woman to break the 5 minute mile. And what's interesting about that is, I mean, A, she wasn't even really to run the mile because the mile was not a sanctioned distance for women still. When she broke the 5 minutes, it was not called a world record. It was called a world best because, again, it wasn't sanctioned. And it was also, I think, only the second time she'd even competed in the mile. And she was so far ahead of everyone else that, her coaches were like, oh, of course she can probably do this. We should probably just have her do this. And she did. And she was sort of like, okay, great. She was, working in a lab at the university at the time. Like, she was in the middle of testing. She had, hadn't slept very well the night before. All of these things, where Roger Bannister's like was down to every moment. He's written an entire book on like every moment of,
Right.
Training and how the pacers and, this and that and what he did before and what he did after and the wind and all of that. And, that no, it's not the same, but it's also like such hugely different contexts when you think about, right, like the way, again, the media kind of framed this was when Leather did break the 5, it was sort of like, oh, well, this is what women can do. Like, women have also been chasing the sub 5 minute mile the same way men have been chasing the sub 4. And it's like, no, this isn't even a
No.
race we've been told we're allowed to do.
Do.
And yet, look at what she could do. And then, within a year, she had dropped it down to 4:45. Again, with no one else running in that same league. So she never had pacers, right? She never had someone she was chasing.
Right.
She was doing this running from the front, not knowing what women were capable of, because we were told all along, not only like, oh, you couldn't do this, but maybe you shouldn't even be running a mile.
Right.
and that during that Olympic cycle, she couldn't even go to the Olympics because there was no
Right.
1600,
Right.
right? So, and that was her, her best distance. And so, again, it's one of those things where you look back and, what opportunities were lost, right?
Right.
And what names we might have known, or what records might have been broken when, if there was just a little more opportunity and faith, right, like placed
Right.
in what women could do. So
Yeah.
that was a really interesting and kind of a fun story to sort of report out, was, these interesting parallels and similarities between the two, just coming from very, very different sporting
Yeah.
contexts.
Well, again, moving up to the marathon, I think the interesting thing there is I think a lot of people have a general sense of, okay, some woman got pulled off they tried to get her off, but there was a lot of women that participated in marathons, and you share a lot of different stories. What's one of your favorites?
I mean, I think, there are so many good ones. I was really drawn to Bobby Gibb because she was sort of this like weirdo outcast who didn't really run with anyone, but would just like drive across the country and run 30 miles in a day just for fun kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And I loved that aspect, and that, she snuck into Boston because they told her no. She applied like a normal person. They told her no. And that's actually, and then she ran it anyway. And there was coverage of that
Mm-hmm.
she, when she crossed the finish line, there were newspaper articles about her. And that's one of the reasons Catherine Switzer did decide to run that marathon as well, was she knew that Bobby had done it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Catherine gets, so much attention. I mean, of course, she also went on to do incredible things that were moved the needle so
Yeah.
much for women marathoners. But she registered under her initials. And then there's that iconic photo
Yes.
series of her being, maybe being pushed out of the race, but maybe trying to have her number taken. There's different kind of stories as it
Mm-hmm.
goes. But, I think all of them were so incredible, and that there were these women that just decided to run them and would just run New
Yeah.
York or Boston every year. I mean, but
Yep.
between, 66 was when Bobby Gibb did it, 67 was Catherine Switzer, and they weren't sanctioned until 72. So there's this like, and then the Olympics weren't sanctioned for the marathon until 84. So you had this
Yeah.
long period of time where, you know, it was just weird. I mean, you were kind of a weird person to run a marathon anyway in that era. Like it was not like a thing everyone did. It was a very
Yeah.
like specific type, right? We're
Hmm.
talking like hundreds of people running these marathons, not
Not
thousands,
like now.
tens of
Yes.
thousands like we do now. And so, to be not only say, oh, I'm a woman who can run, but like I'm a woman and I want to run 26.2 miles.
Right.
Like that is, I mean, you had to be so incredible. And like you said, just like you had to have that mindset of being a
Yeah.
barrier breaker without thinking about it too, like, oh, this is just, I want to do
Yeah.
this, so I'm
Well,
going to do it.
that was very much the kind of the overall impression I got from all of these women is they didn't see it as a big deal. They knew that they had to do things to be able to not be recognized or whatnot, but they weren't doing it necessarily to make a point or to that's just something that they did, that they love to do. They love to run. It made them feel good. It's and I think that's something that so many of us, and now you're a runner too. Welcome to the club.
Yes.
That have run for so long is like there's just something that inherently draws us to that makes us want to do more. And so many of those women were so gifted,
Yeah.
incredibly gifted,
Yeah.
that by today's standards would still be recognized that way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
for you, like as in jump ahead to the ending here, you started becoming a runner yourself. Like, were there any of those voices as you were learning about these women that made you kind of want to pursue this a little bit, or get in on the endorphins?
Oh, 1,000%, 1,000%. I mean, I used to consider myself a runner. I did cross country, like at a young age till like ninth grade, and I enjoyed it. I
Yeah,
enjoyed it, and I was a soccer player, so that was,
I can see
that's a
that.
lot of running. A lot of running. And so that kind of became my like, okay, this can be my like method of exercise for a little while in my early 20s. And at a certain point, I was living in New York and I was like, I'm too anxious about running. Like, I don't want to do it anymore.
Mm,
It made me too anxious to like go. And I think part of it was like living in the city, being watched everywhere, like
mm,
running among cars, getting
yep,
yelled at, all of those
yep.
things. Um, and I just sort of said, if this is causing me stress, I'm going to stop.
Yeah, that's fair.
so, so I did. And then, I moved to Seattle. I think I tried to run like twice in Seattle when I moved back, and I was like, oh, hills.
Yes, I
Um,
was going to say there's a few more hills in Seattle.
yes.
They're vertical. Yep. Hmm.
And then I got pregnant, and I didn't run when I was pregnant, mostly because I was like told not to do too much and not to do new things, right? I walked a lot of hills while I was
Mm.
pregnant. And then I had my second a few years later, and that's I sold the book right after I had my second child. And so kind of in that year after the first year of his life, I got back into, I mean, I was writing the book. I was writing, and it definitely, I would write these stories and be like, I want to do that. I just
Yeah.
want to like, or I want to do something that pushes myself, like
Yeah.
do the things that, these women did and proved for so long, and made them feel stronger and capable and like go out and do all these other wonderful things in the world, right?
Yeah.
And I think also just when you're coming back from having kids and coming back into basically like a new body and things like that, just starting to do, I did a lot of like strength classes, I did a lot of cycling classes, and eventually I was like, you know what, like I just want to run again, like I just want to
Yeah.
see how it goes. And now I'm like totally addicted. I mean, I do all kinds of other things too. I still do strength at least twice a week, and I like to swim too now, which is another whole other thing. I didn't know how to swim. I like learned how to swim like two
Oh,
years ago.
that's
And
awesome.
I like now I can swim laps, and
Yeah.
so that's been really fun. And I ran my first half marathon last fall. And
Congrats.
yeah, thank you. And I think, it definitely, those voices are in your head, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's like, I have the opportunity to do this. Like, I have the
Right.
opportunity to do these things that these women were told were impossible. And yet, and also just like, I do want to know what I'm capable of. Like, I do
Right.
want to push myself as much as I can. I think having an extremely stressful world we're living in helps as well. It
Mm-hmm.
is something that really, really, I have found keeps me so much more mentally balanced, and
Yeah.
just gives me that outlet. Is like,
Yep.
if I don't run or exercise for like 2 days in a row, I know, I can tell, like,
Yes.
I fall off the cliff.
Yep.
And yeah, but I think it definitely has inspired me. I think one of the other things that really inspired me is I'm really competitive, and I think that's like, part of growing up a soccer player was like, I just had this like intense competition inside. And I couldn't find that in running when I was just jogging by myself, right? Like, I couldn't
Oh,
like tap into that. So
okay.
now I think having like the smart watches, and having like goals, and having my like races to train for, and running with my brothers sometimes, like, those things help me so much because it
Yeah.
makes it more fun for me.
Mm-hmm.
um and I've come to like learn that it's okay to just sort of like have a chill have a chill workout.
I was like, where did you grow up? You do not sound like a West Coaster.
Oh gosh, I know, I get that a lot. And but one of the other things that really helped me was when I went out to the UK to see the spine race that Jasmine Paris had won the year before, and I was talking with Claire. I'm forgetting her last name right now, but she is a French runner, and she was the first
Mm-hmm.
woman to win that, and she's gone on to like do incredible ultras. Like, just
Mm-hmm.
she's done like all of these huge ultras. And I was asking her about running, and I was like, well, what drew you to being like an ultra runner? Like,
Right.
like, what is this? And she's like, well, I'm slow. Like, I'm slow. I'm not fast, but like
I'm down with
this,
that.
because like I'm slow, but I can just keep going. And like, so then I'm really good at something. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I love that because I'm slow now.
So
Like,
you're going
I'm
to do ultras now. Is this your announcement? And I mean, being in Seattle, you guys have so many races out there. Like, I am a
we do.
closet ultra fan. Like, it's never going to be me. And plus, East Coast, our trails are not as good as yours. I'm just going to be clear and upfront about that. But
The
like,
weather isn't as good either for that.
you know, um, but no, I mean, I feel like, that's kind of that next frontier. And not only women after they have kids, but now we have masters women, and it cracks me up that like masters is after like 30, 35, and I'm like, what is
I
50
know.
then?
I know.
I'm chatting with ultra marathoner Lauren Piratz. She was the top American at UTMB 100 right after we chat. And like she's gonna
Amazing.
go, like, I mean, like we're basically the same age, and I was like, how? But like the fact that that's an expectation at this point, and that
Mhm.
society is reasonably okay with that. Yes, there's some inequities in the ultra world. That's a whole separate conversation. But like, I mean, how cool that we are there where there's a women's race, and the women that are doing so well are masters athletes and have a
Yeah.
whole other, career as a physician, and all these other things. Like it seems so fast, but then once you read your book, you realize how many steps it took to get there, and why couldn't it be faster? Had people just opened up their minds a little bit sooner. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's incredible. No, I like joke that a marathon sounds too hard, but like an ultra sounds doable. I
There's
don't
more
know why.
snacks. That's
Yeah. It's
They
like
talk
you get
about
to
food
go at
all the
your own
time.
pace.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
You
I mean,
stop.
the pickle juice, Pop Tarts, like it's all good. That might be your jam. Okay,
No.
so if you're gonna
We'll
do one, you're
see.
gonna have to come back and tell us all about it.
All right. I think that's the other problem though, is right, like these long distances, you need so much time to train.
You
And,
do. Well, and I think
maybe
that's
when my kids are a little older.
I will say, I mean, I think I got the bug to get back more to longer distance and competing and things like that. Once, probably the last 3 years, my oldest is almost 15, so do the math on that. My daughter just turned 12. So yeah,
Mhm.
when they get up into those higher single digits and into the double digits, I do think you have a little bit more freedom to be
Yeah.
able to kind of navigate. And that athleticism is still there, which is a really cool thing to discover. It's very similar to, I think, postpartum, where you're like trying to find this new body again. Same thing going into perimenopause. And I can't even imagine all these women again that we didn't actually talk about postpartum as a thing. We didn't actually talk about perimenopause or menopause as a thing. It wasn't acknowledged. Trying to
Right.
navigate these different phases in life, and then also these big things like marathons and racing and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's just it's we're so lucky to have stories like yours that, again, I don't there was very few names that I recognized in there, and that to me was so cool. I'm like, these are the people that we need to tell our kids about, that these are the stories that need to be shared much more. What are you looking at next? Are you gonna do more projects kind of in the I'm assuming you're gonna stay in the kind of the female space. That seems where
Yeah.
your passions are. Kind of what's next for you?
Yeah. Well, I am currently doing kind of a lot of reporting of articles and things. Sort of, I'm keeping my eye on Title IX because we're experiencing a lot of
I live in
upheaval
Virginia. Yes, I
there.
understand.
So,
Yes. Yes.
so yeah, so that's something that kind of has my attention right now. In general, I'm really curious about gender, and I think I always will be.
Hmm.
And yeah, we'll see in terms of long-term projects, but right now it just feels like I need to kind of pay attention to the news and kind of keep that finger on the pulse of the whole idea of
Yeah.
historical context and what we're living
Yes.
through and all of that. So
I
it's a tough time.
Yes. No, again, if you live in Virginia and you know anything about Title IX, you understand what I'm talking about. If not, Google it. Not the time or the place here, but no, I think having historical context for so much of these things and then how they're being weaponized
Yes.
is I can't even, there's no word for it. And I think the more that we can have, again, good information about where this stuff came from, what was the intent, I think hopefully more people will. Um, it just, again, you can just lead the horse to water. You can't make them drink, but at least let's have that, good information out there for sure. So thank you for doing
Yes.
that because
Yes.
we need that. We need that.
Oh,
All
thanks.
right.
My
On a
goodness.
positive note, we're going to pop at the end of every episode. We ask a couple of questions. So, what's a
Hmm.
book you're reading or a podcast you're listening to right now?
Ooh, that's a great question. Um,
What does the author
well, I'm
read?
what does the author read? Oh my gosh, I just read a wonderful novel actually called Outlawed by Anna North,
Okay.
and it's kind of a retelling of the like old Western, like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid kind
Ooh.
of idea,
Okay.
but it's based, actually, you might love it because it's sort of based in this the idea that that gang actually is all barren women who were like kicked out of their like
No
home
way.
societies because they couldn't have children, and so then became this kind of like cross-dressing, like, do good but do crime and protect
That sounds
ourselves.
awesome. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. All
So
right.
that
I
was
like that
really that
energy.
was a really good one. Yeah.
Okay.
And a
I
lot
like it.
about like midwifery and kind of like how the science was evolving at that time, but like
Yes.
in these women's circles and like who was called a witch and who was called, kind of pushed out for doing those things.
Yes.
So yeah,
Okay.
it's an interesting one.
Yeah, so there's several places in your book where you do go into kind of like these little sidebars with medicine. So maybe your next book is kind of over in that genre,
I
where
know, right?
really,
I do love medicine and science. It's my other love. I would have gone to med school if I didn't go into journalism. So
you know what? Here's the thing: if you don't have somebody to tell the story,
Yeah,
right?
right.
I also appreciate my dad taught English for 35 years. So I spent my childhood summers looking for David, Thoreau's house and original copies of Robert Frost books and Emerson and all of that. So I do have a
Oh,
love of a good story. So
oh, I love that.
we
I
need
know
more
they are. I think
storytellers.
they are connected. Yeah.
Yes, definitely, definitely. All right, for you, what's the favorite activity you've had since becoming a mom? And it doesn't necessarily have to do with your kids.
Oh. Oh my goodness. I mean, I have to say like weightlifting, like that is something that
Yeah,
I've like gotten really into,
love it.
and really like intentionally. And I think part of it was like I didn't lift during my first pregnancy and I did during my second, and I felt so much better and I
Yes.
felt so much stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just become something that like, yeah, is like a really great reminder of power. And again, it's like an exercise that you don't get to be competitive with, but it makes you feel really good.
You can if you want. I can point you in that direction.
Oh
But no,
yeah.
another day, another podcast. No, but again, like we've got so much great data about weightlifting and pregnancy and women in barbells and just a lot of great research there. There was a couple of studies that just came out that it's okay for mom to do exercise on her back with a barbell. It's great for mom. It's great for the fetus. No problems there. Like we finally are starting to get good information saying, hey, we're actually this is safe for everybody, all good when we've had women doing it for years. So it's nice to see that stuff
Yes,
coming out.
that's
So
so exciting. That's
yeah,
so
definitely.
exciting.
Definitely. All right. Who is someone in your space that we should know about? Who's somebody that's telling good stories?
Oh, oh. Um, well, you've had Christine Yu on. She's
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. I would say, if you don't know Frankie De La Creta, they are a non-binary journalist that covers sports and gender,
Cool.
and they have a newsletter. They do like really creative things, and I'm always jealous because they have like 800 stories going at once, and I can only think of like one thing at a time.
I got you.
But they are a wonderful person to follow.
Awesome. I'll check that out. All right. And then last one, what does it mean to you to be an active mom?
Ooh. Oh, so many things. I mean, like being active, just physically, it means like showing my kids that like, you know, we like their parents take care of their bodies
Yeah.
and take care of their brains, and we tell them, oh, I need to go out for a run, and sometimes they say, no, don't go. And I say, I need this for my brain. I
It's
need
better
this
for
to
you.
be
Yeah.
strong. And sometimes they'll even say, can I go with you? And so we'll like jog them around the block a couple times first. And that's wonderful. And, I think also just being an active mom means like being a present parent and
Yeah.
like, being there for them and encouraging them to do cool things with their bodies and be active and
Yeah.
find the things that bring them joy, which is, not always super apparent. One of my kids is very sporty and into all of the sports and wants to play everything.
Yep.
And one of them is not interested.
Same here.
And but I do
He'll
think
get
he might
there.
be a good runner eventually. Like I think he might be a runner. So we'll see about that. But yeah, just being super involved and open about all of that stuff, and that,
Love that.
boys and girls aren't different in what they can do in terms of like we can all try new things and all try different sports, and
Yeah.
encouraging all types of movement.
I love that. I love that. Being the example, showing him it's normal. I love that. I love that. All right. If you guys want to check out more of Maggie's work and check out her book, Better, Faster, Farther, How Running Changed Everything We Know About Women, you can find her over on Instagram, Maggie J. Mertens. Thank you, Maggie, so much for doing all the research and bringing these names forward and sharing these stories. And I'm sorry I got angry. But I think out of anger comes drive to keep sharing and keep those stories alive. So thank you so much for all that you've done and everything to come for you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Carrie. This was great.
If you're navigating pregnancy, postpartum, or perimenopause, whether personally or professionally, check out all our free resources and upcoming courses at carriepagliano.com. This podcast reflects the opinions of Dr. Carrie Pagliano and her guests, and it is for entertainment purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Always consult your healthcare provider with any medical questions. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. And thanks for listening.